welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus with Bob Mendelsohn.
Tonight we're studying Exodus chapter 3. Lawyer and statesman Daniel Webster was a powerful orator who gave early evidence of his quick mind and his quick way with words. One day, his father, who was to be absent from home, left Daniel and his brother Ezekiel specific work instructions. But on his return he found the task still undone, and he questioned his sons about their idleness. "What have you been doing, Ezekiel?" he asked. "Nothing, sir." "Well, Daniel, what have you been doing?" "Helping Zeke, sir," was his reply. There's something about excuses that rivet us. There's always a reason. There's always a person we can blame. There's always something that warrants our admission or our inadmission. We live in a world of excuse after excuse, and it's hard to swim upstream against the flood. We don't always do what we're supposed to do we? Listen, a poor workman always finds fault with his tools. Or how about these? Still true because the people alive then are still making excuses to this day. Here are the 10 most used excuses. Number 1, I forgot. Number 2, no one told me to go ahead. Number 3, I didn't think it was that important. Number 4, wait until the boss comes back and ask him. Number 5, I didn't know you were in a hurry for it. Number 6, that's the way we've always done it. Number 7, that's not my department. Number 8, how was I to know this was different? Number 9, I'm waiting for an okay. Number 10, that's his job, not mine. Now if you listen to those and you think, yeah, I've heard others say those to me, you forget we've said those very same things. If you will, most excuses fall into one of 3 categories. The first is outright denial, or a rejection of any personal involvement or responsibility. I didn't do it. That's the number one thing. That's what we should say when asked, did you do it? No, I didn't do it. No excuses, no alibis, no reasons, no the cat ate it or the dog. We refuse to take any responsibility about an action or an inaction. I remember sitting with my brother and his family in California. It was years ago, and my niece, young Rhonda, was perhaps 4 at the time. She had her mouth filled with bread. It was early in the morning. I asked her if she was hungry. She didn't answer. I noticed the bread filling her mouth. "Have you been eating?" I asked. She didn't answer, but then, with her mouth barely able to noise an answer, she said, "Not me." Her wide chipmunk cheeks, and she spat out moistened breadcrumbs betraying her. That was pretty clever. The second category is, I didn't do it, but it's not my fault. The person looks for another to blame, often the wife or the boss or anyone within or more probably outside of earshot. He says, I would have done it, but it's their fault. I would be holy, but they didn't teach me. I would know this, but they didn't get me ready. There's always a reason why we don't do what we're supposed to do, and there's someone whom I can blame. The third category of excuse is, I did it, but now it's not that I did or didn't do it, but rather that someone else or some circumstance is able to be co-blamed. I did it, but the car died, or the clock failed when I set it to awaken me at the right time. I did my homework, but on my way to school today, the dog ate my homework. The assignment wasn't clear. This is what we hear preeminently in our world today. These are what we see and hear even from our own lips. We aren't the only ones. Even back in the days of the Bible, this was so. Look at Moses in Exodus chapter 3. Let's read the first 12 verses. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. Moses is God's man in the day. He was called to do and to perform what the Jewish people have been begging God to do for hundreds of years. This is remarkable in itself. They were not belly aching, but as we saw last week, they were crying out to God. Remember, he says here in the text, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is verse 6. That's how God introduces himself. You promised the land. they cried to the Almighty. Yes, things were bad. We saw that in chapters 1 and 2 of Exodus, with taskmasters who made it bad, and even worse if we did complain out loud. Pharaoh had ordered all the Jewish boys born to be killed. That was bad news for a hurting people. So the people have natural reasons to be forgetting the promises of God. Into this painful situation, God drops a baby, fantastically. This unusual baby, Moses, is God's choice and will fulfill the promises of the Lord, bringing them to pass in his day. His natural family, remember, raised him for the first 3 years. Then he returned to Pharaoh's family for the next 37 years. He's a prince in Egypt for his first 40. Moses had trouble on his 40th birthday and had to leave town quickly without passing go, without collecting $200. He travels to the back side of the wilderness. That's actually the Hebrew there, not the west side, but the back side. And there he meets with Reuel's daughter, Zipporah, has a child, and now he's 80 years old. We've gone from 0 to 80 faster than in a Lamborghini. So verse 1 tells us that Horeb is the mountain of God. What do we call that later? Mount Sinai. So it gets different names depending on whether it's Akkadian or Sumerian or Jordanian. Different peoples have different names. Mount Kosciuszko was named differently than what the Aboriginal peoples would have called it. Lane Cove is different than the Camaragal people would have called Lane Cove. You get the idea. So Horeb is the mountain of God because God showed up there and visited Moses with the 10 Commandments. He'll do that in chapter 20. The bush is burning. That's not unusual, right? Verse 2. Bushes burn in the wilderness. That's what they do. Tumbleweeds catch on fire in a desert sun. Then the voice comes from it. Now that's unusual. And the voice says, take off your shoes. And Moses and you and I would have done the same thing. Yes, sir. Take off my shoes. But remember, a shepherd would never take off his shoes in a wilderness. He needs his foot protection. Still, someone substantial has spoken. God said, I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians. God is making a promise. This is an awesome moment in history. Moses should have been glad. He should have rejoiced. He should have shouted, wow, before I was born, the people longed for this day. Fantastic. Let's rejoice. Let's have a party. God is about to act. But in verse 10, we see excuse number 1. God says, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh. Wait a minute, he's thinking. That's not the way it's supposed to work. It's not my job. We've never done it this way before. This is definitely someone else's department. Moses honestly is asking for a personal appointment. He asks for negotiation. He wants to excuse himself. Verse 11, Moses says, who am I? I'm not somebody so epis, so mighty, at least not compared to you. The people have been waiting for you to act, and now you say you will act. So, hey, don't let me get in the way. You go ahead. I'm not the kind of fellow you want for this position. Look, what God answered, or rather what God did not answer. He never answered who Moses was, right? Moses' question is, who am I? He doesn't say, Moshe, you're terrific. He doesn't say, Moshe, I've made you, you're 80 years old, I've designed you, I've got you to the place just like I wanted, you're wearing the right clothing, you married the right chick. No, his answer had nothing to do with Moses. It had to do with who God is. What does he say? I will be with you. Moses might be thinking, great, could I have another question, sir? This whole thing is about going to the Jews. What are they going to say? They'll wonder who sent me. Look at verse number 13. Moses said to God, behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel. I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And then they may say to me, what's his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I am who I am. Sometimes I will be who I will be. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God furthermore said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is my memorial name to all generations. Go, gather the elders of Israel together and tell them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I'm indeed concerned about you and what's been done to you in Egypt. So I said, I'll bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite, Hittite, Amorite, Perizzite, Hivite, and Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey. They will pay heed to what you say. And you, with the elders of Israel, will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now please, let us go on a 3-day journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know, verse 19, that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go except under compulsion. So I'll stretch out my hand, I'll strike Egypt with all the miracles which I shall do in the midst of it, and after that he'll let you go. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be that when you go, you will not go out empty-handed. But every woman shall ask of her neighbor, and the woman who lives in her house, articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters. Thus you will plunder the Egyptians. This whole thing about going to the Jews, what will the Jewish people say? They'll wonder, who sent me? What am I supposed to say about your name? Could I get some more information? You think they're natural conversation techniques, but we'll have to look at chapter 4, verse 13. This is just a hint. Look at 4:13. He said, please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will. This is Moses. To get the whole context of the rebuttals, Moses basically there is saying, please, Lord, send by the hand of whomever you will. If I had my own Bible, I'd write in whomever else you will. Moses is saying, I have a recommendation list. I'm not the guy for the job, but I know some people. I know people, you know people. You might be confused or troubled, so let me help you, sir, if that's okay. That's the reflection we have from chapter 4 that we don't yet have in chapter 3. So I believe Moses is making excuses. Moses is arguing for God to do this another way. His first excuse is identity. Moses says, I'm not a person of rank. I'm not a person of superiority of nature. I don't have the great man theory worked out in my own person. If you want this job done, you must choose someone else. God says, it's not about you, Moshe. I'm going to go and do this. I'm the one who will act. When God hears somebody's sad cry, I'm a nobody, he never replies, no, you are somebody. God's answer is, you are mine and I am somebody. Do you hear the difference? He doesn't praise you, he has you to praise him. In the modern world, there's been a serious self-stroking that has so subsumed us these days. If you're not self-actualized or self-consuming or self-aggrandizing or just plain selfish, then you will not succeed in this dog-eat-other-dog world. So the point of my being somebody is to survive in a world that's ruthless. But God wants us to succeed, not only to survive. He wants us to trust him in all things and in all circumstances. You're nobody? Right, I got that. But I am somebody is God's answer. He doesn't puff us up. Do you hear the difference between the way the world psychobabbles us and what God says to us? I've chosen you. Yeah, but I'm not anybody. Right, I know that. But I'm going to demonstrate myself through you. If you were somebody, I couldn't use you. What did the Apostle Paul say? Not many of us are something. Not many of us are noble or mighty or strong. But he uses the weak. I'm nobody. Right, that's the point. Now you'd think if a prince of Egypt can say he's nobody, what am I? Right? If a guy who was the prince for 40 years, and now he's lived on the backside of the wilderness for 40 years, is a nobody. He's got a wife, he's got kids, but he's a nobody. What am I? His second excuse is not identity, but ignorance. I don't know enough. I would know enough, but they didn't teach me. I didn't have the advantage of Brooklyn or a yeshiva. I didn't have all the possibilities that others had. It's just not the way we do it in Australia. Maybe in Japan or Israel, yes, but we don't do it that way here. So after discussing how students had to at least be competent in reading, writing, listening, analyzing, and computing before they would be graduating from high school, this is 30 years ago, one administrator provided the following list. The excuses it contains were actually turned in by parents to one school district. Listen to this. Dear school, please accuse John for being absent on January 28th, 29th, 30, 31, 32, and 33. Number 2, Chris has an acre in his side. Number 3, Mary could not come to school because she's bothered by very close veins. Number 4, John has been absent because he had 2 teeth taken off his face. These are from parents. Number 5, I kept Billy home because he had to go Christmas shopping because I didn't know what size she'd wear. Number 6, please excuse Gloria. She has been sick and under the doctor. Number 7, my son is under the doctor's care and should not take physical education. Please execute him. Number 8, Lily was absent from school yesterday as she had a growing over. Number 9, please excuse Ray Friday. He has loose vowels. Number 10, please excuse Joyce from physical education for a few days. Yesterday she fell out of a tree and misplaced her hip. Number 11, please excuse Blanche from gym today. She is administrating. Number 12, Carlos was absent yesterday because he was playing football. He was hurt in his growing part. Number 13, my daughter was absent yesterday because she was tired. She spent the weekend with the Marines. Number 14, please excuse Diane from being absent yesterday. She was in bed with cramps. Number 15, please excuse Jimmy for being. It was his father's fault. I believe being informed is good, and we often use the excuse that we don't know enough. And Moses is saying this. He says, I don't know enough. God doesn't give him an academic degree. He doesn't tell him, yes, Moses, you do know enough. You're a smart boy chick. He says this, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. If it were modern Hebrew, I'd say that means I will be who I will be, future tense. God's answer is that all that the verb to be says in every tense, future, past, and present, are summed up in the Almighty. He's Yahweh, the Eternal One. He was, He is, He will come. Not like He will be, like John Palikowski and others of the process theology movement. Here's another set of excuses people used. According to a UPI news item, the Metropolitan Insurance Company received some unusual explanations for accidents from its automobile policyholders. Following are just a few. Number 1, an invisible car came out of nowhere, struck my car, and vanished. Number 2, the other car collided with mine without warning me of its intention. Number 3, I'd been driving my car for 40 years when I fell asleep at the wheel and had the accident. Next, as I reached an intersection, a hedge sprang up, obscuring my vision. Next, I pulled away from the side of the road, glanced at my mother-in-law, and headed over the embankment. The pedestrian had no idea which direction to go. I ran over him. These are terrible. Can you imagine opening the mail at the insurance company and reading these and saying, I can't believe it. Next, the telephone pole was approaching fast. I attempted to swerve out of its path when it struck my front end. The guy was all over the road. I had to swerve a number of times before I hit him. Finally, the indirect cause of this accident was a little guy in a small car with a big mouth. Well, back to our story. God says this, Moses, you are right. You are ignorant. You are uninformed. The answer to them, however, is not you, it's me. In all of our uncertainties, God's answer is not you, it's Himself. That's making you radically less than self-important, and that is healthy. So God and Moses are having this conversation. Moses is being told to go to Pharaoh and get the 3-day travel pass. Go to Pharaoh and tell him that me and the kids and 600,000 of our closest friends have to go out for the weekend. The big weekend out. Do you like the end of verse 22? Every woman is to go spoil the Egyptian women. What's that for? Is it compensation? Is that right that we should enact justice on them in this way? It was the women. What did the women have? They didn't hire the slaves. The government should have paid, right? Pharaoh, the king. Even in our modern days after the Holocaust, the Swiss government is paying reparations because of thievery. Jewish people are getting their property back. Is that what this is? After 400 years of slavery? Is that what this stuff is for? What are they going to use it for? The tabernacle. It's all about the building that's yet to come, where God would dwell. God wants the Jewish people to build the tabernacle. We're going to get 15 chapters from 25 to 40. And we will need the gold and silver, etc., to bring God honor later. What was used for self-promoting or idol worship now would be used for God promotion later on. Although the golden calf would be a misuse of the gold sooner than that. We'll look at chapter 4 next week and see his other 3 excuses, which bottom line into, I am unwilling. Look, friends, there are many things God will tell you to do in your life. Things as simple as love your neighbor, or love your wife, or as simple as taking food to your neighbor when they're hurting. But we always have excuses. I was 19 years old when I first heard the gospel of Yeshua. I said, I'm Jewish, I don't need Jesus. How silly was that? We all have so many excuses why we won't give our lives to the one who died and gave himself for us. Those of us who are believers, when you get told by God to take the message of Yeshua to the whole world, what are you going to do? Will you say, well, I can wait for the professionals, the Bible school graduates. God must certainly use only them. After all, who am I? My identity. To each, God does not say, you demand. What he says is, trust me. What he wants is for us to know his presence. If you say, well, I'm not that smart, he says, I am, and I'll be in the place where you need me to be. Remember, Yeshua said, don't worry, don't fear when people bring you before kings and governors and people of prominence. What did he say? What's going to happen when you get brought before the big guns? The Holy Spirit will give you what to say, will give you the words. He'll fill you with what to speak. The Psalm says, open your mouth wide and I will fill it. This is not Moses, come on, I'll take you out on a 10-week lesson and you'll learn everything you need. He said, go to Pharaoh, I'll give you the word. And that's still true to this day. So that a bush is in the wilderness is not unusual. That a bush is burning in the wilderness is not unusual. But that a bush is burning and not consumed, that's unusual. And then a voice comes out of it and says, take off your shoes. I'd say, yes, sir. Yeah, these are pretty remarkable. Now, some people make a big deal in verse 2 about the angel of the Lord appearing to him. I don't think that the angel of the Lord in the record of the Older Testament is Yeshua. I don't think so for various reasons. The most notable being, if he had appeared over time incidentally, then the incarnation would not be a miracle.
It does say in Micah 5:2, his goings forth are from everlasting.
It doesn't say in Micah 5 that he will regularly pop up Mikedem, but it says that he is Mikedem, from eternity, from the past, from way back when. So to then take that and say these angels of Yahweh are somehow Yeshua is a thin argument. The one like the Son of Man, it doesn't say it was the Son of Man, like the Son of Man. So I understand why people want to make these early visitations Yeshua. Christophanies, Theophanies. There are several of these that pop up. It already happened in Genesis several times.
He says, say that I am, essentially. The angel is saying, I am. He's describing himself as the
Well,
Almighty.
no, the argument that most say is that he's reporting what I am has said, and he's sent. Every malach, every angel is a messenger, not necessarily the one who sent the message, but is bringing forth the message.
Well, doesn't the same idea happen in Revelation, where John is forever falling before him? I'm a fellow servant just like you. Why would he then ask him to do such a thing?
To take off his shoes or to bow down? Look, these are the mysteries that we've got to embrace. I don't think it's a Christophany. That is a messianic visitation, because number one, I think the Jewish people would have been much more geared for that when Yeshua popped up, and they weren't, and secondly, the incarnation is diminished. The miracle of the incarnation, where Yeshua, where God himself takes on flesh, is, I think, first-time miracle of the person of the Son of Man and the Son of God on earth. That's why it's so spectacular.
But the manifestation of that angel doesn't necessarily mean that he is becoming mortal.
Well, that same angel wrestled with Jacob all night.
He calls it Peniel.
Sure,
I've seen the face of God.
I know. Here's this appearance of what's called clearly Malach Yahweh, the angel of Yahweh, who speaks out of the bush, and I appreciate that, and that same angel shows up again and again throughout the record of the Older Testament. There are some believers who want to make that into Melchizedek. There are some believers who want to make Melchizedek into Yeshua. There are people all over the map on that. I've just come to a personal conclusion that that's not Yeshua, but it's someone whom the Father sent to represent him. I have no problem with that. Who can wrestle with an angel better than a World Wrestling Federation. And the miracle is that God is speaking to him. I must turn aside now and see this. This is really remarkable. And the Lord saw that he turned aside. Okay, so there's Yahweh who saw, verse 4, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, don't come and, take off your shoes. And he said, verse 6 is pretty important. What is that? I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. What's different?
God is mentioned 3 times.
Yeah, why would you do that?
Because you're triune.
And I think that's significant. You can't dismiss that. The God of your fathers, big category, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Now, towards the end of the book, at the end of the chapter, we see that same phrase, but thinned down to the way we say it in the prayer book, and usually in verse 16, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me. So we get almost a Genesis reflection that God is 3 and yet God is 1. We get both, just like we saw in Genesis 1. Verse 26, let us make man. Verse 27, so he made him in his image, singular. The wonderful juxtaposition of the triune and the singular, lest we get off the subject. What else in verse 6? That idea, what does Yeshua use this to say? Verse 6, he appeared to him as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. What did Yeshua use when he gave that commentary? When Yeshua quoted this, who's he talking to? Some Sadducees. So what is Yeshua answering? That Abraham's alive, that Isaac's alive, and Jacob's alive. So what's his argument? That people who die are risen, that they are raised or resurrected. And by doing that, he's challenging the theology of the Sadducees who say that men die and that's the end. The dead are raised. So he uses this text, which I think is brilliant. When you read this as a kid every year, did you ever think, oh yeah, God's the God of the living? You'd never think that. That's just his nickname, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. But Yeshua uses that to say the dead are raised. Brilliant. He's so clever. Verse 7, we read this. Look at this. The Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction. You know what the Hebrew is? I have seeingly seen. A lot of times in the Hebrew, when the verb is repeated, it's amplifying it. Ro'eh ra'iti. I have surely seen. So it's common throughout the Tanakh that there is double use of the verb to say, I have really seen. What a comfort that is to Moses, who saw the Egyptian beating on the Hebrew and who saw the Hebrew beating on his fellow Hebrew. And now God says, you think you've seen something. I have really seen. And I've seen the affliction of all my people, and I'm about to act. See how that plays out? I am, verse 7, aware, yada, of their sufferings. I know their sufferings. So I have come down, yorad. I came down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians. Really, it's not power. What's it? Yad. From the hand of the Egyptians.
How many years were they?
400 years. It wasn't all slavery. Remember, Joseph was there and he was the 2IC. Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. That's just so huge. And I really see in that, in verse 14, all 3 tenses of the verb to be, which is why some call him the Eternal One. And just tell him, Ehyeh has sent me to you. Some say, is that the same as Yeshua said in John chapter 8 when they asked him, wait a minute, you're not even 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham's day? And he said, before Abraham was, I am. And it would certainly have been a variant, if not the actual word, because we don't know what the Hebrew was, because it's written in Greek. I like that the women are going to spoil the Egyptians. I like that we're going to go out for 3 days. But verse 19, God says, but I know the king will only do this under chazak, under this strong hand of compulsion.
You've been listening to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus in Australia. For more information, contact Jews for Jesus, Post Office Box 925, Sydney, Australia 2001. God bless you.